So the three presentations were very rich and stimulating, and so we have 20 minutes for questions, half an hour. So is there any question in the audience?
First of all, so my name is Jonge, University of Groningen. First of all, thank you very much for these three very interesting presentations. I have a question to each of you that is sort of loosely based around the same theme, which is journalism. So my question about that to Luca is, what is your definition of autocratization? Does that actually include, are you using the VDEM Liberal Democracy Index that actually includes things like media and pressure on academia and civil society? Or did I understand you correctly that it actually excludes that, and that your definition is kind of more narrow? My general question, which is always difficult for a researcher then to answer, is: would the finding be the same if you take a wider definition of autocratization? So that's the second, also around journalism to Léonie. About semantic rebranding, why was that need felt, and why does that work or stick? So why was the need felt by far-right politicians to try rebranding, and why does that work or stick? So is there, who is responsible for this sticking? Is it journalists falling from it, or falling for it, or politicians falling for it, or not properly addressing that? Or are we responsible for it as academics for not telling journalists to not fall for it? I'm interested in your elaboration. And the same, finally, to Thomas. I think you should know that both Petra and I have been in touch with Judge Andras Jacob about your admiration for him. It was lovely to see him mentioned by you. What you meant by the trap of neutrality and this point of false equivalence, right? So essentially, you seem to be quoting Andras Jacob. My sense was that you quoted him approvingly, so that you actually agree with his point. But maybe you can elaborate on that. So that neutrality is not neutral, that the virus is not the same as the vaccine, as you mentioned it. But again, how can you, many autocrats that I talk to personally basically say that they are the real Democrats. So they would be telling, listening to a conference like here, like one big bunch of disinformation, well, they go to Lisbon to talk. So again, who is responsible for making that distinction? Because if you want to make legislation, for example, in France, you need to have a definition of your democracy that you're defending and which you want to avoid disinformation about. So thanks a lot for that.
Okay, we collect a couple of questions.
Okay.
Maybe. Yeah.
So there's another question.
Okay, this is for Léonie. I'm just thinking back to that figure where you're talking about far right composed of the undemocratic and democratic elements, and I mean it's connected kind of with what John was just saying and with what you said in your opening comments about the inherent contradiction between illiberalism and democracy, all that Fareed Zakaria stuff. So basically what I'm trying to ask is, I mean, do you think can we really, thinking about like the Venn diagram or whatever, can we neatly distinguish, are there far right, or whatever you want to call them, radical right, parties that have really far right agendas on everything from sexuality to migrants to, substantive policies, but really who are still committed to, like liberal democratic process, independent judiciary, all that? Or does that really just exist more in theory than in practice? I guess I'm just wondering, can we trust these forces, to really respect independent judiciary, judicial review, all that, or ultimately do they all kind of have an agenda of autocracy behind it?
So there was another question here.
Yes, I actually have a question to Léonie and also to Thomas. So Léonie, you're talking about the normalization of these extreme rhetorics, making it salonfähig, as you say. And you're talking about influencer and artists in media. And I am told if you're a 15-year-old German on TikTok, then you consume political content, then you only have access to Linke and AfD. Both of which are financed by Russia. So I was wondering whether you're looking at the channels of money or these aspects as well in your research. And with regard to Thomas, I think these false equivalence or false symmetry has been addressed by many of us, including John, but also with Laurent Pech, we wrote a long report for the European Parliament on the annual rule of law report saying that these that the quality, the difference in the quality of member states is not emphasized by the European Commission. My favorite example is when Hungary is praised for financing the media authority well, and this is the media authority that is basically just government propaganda and silencing all the opposition and all the government critiques. But here is my question. So who has to say that there is a qualitative difference between member state and member state? My impression is that you can't shift the whole responsibility to the court. So if there are other branches of government in the broad sense saying that, yeah, this is not a democracy, like the European Parliament saying Hungary is a hybrid authoritarian regime, then other branches of government of power can refer to it later on.
There was another question here.
Hi, my name is Juliette Stump, and I'm a immigration and crimmigration scholar from the United States, from Lewis and Clark Law School. And I really appreciated all three of these presentations. My question is for Léonie and Thomas. And it has to do with, Léonie, I really appreciated this really close analysis that you gave of how normalization works and how it's used as a tool of autocracy. And so my question is whether you see that rapid and strategic normalization of terminology as specifically a tool of the far right, or whether it's whether that's just one of the tools that one can use in trying to change law and policy. And I guess what I think about is, at least in the United States, and I think here as well, the rapid transformation in normalization of gay marriage, of gay love, was something that occurred really quite rapidly in the United States. And I think I teach that as part of my immigration and crimmigration course, because I think it really illustrates ways in which there was a strategic decision to use language of love in order to ultimately get to that law and policy change. And the reason that I include Thomas in this question is this really just a trap of neutrality? Or is this kind of normalization and the way that's being carried out really a far-right tool?
Thank you. Is there any other question in the audience? Okay, we can start with the, okay, yeah.
That's already something. Thanks a lot for the question. I got three answer. So how we define autocratization, there are different definitions. So for me, I define as, political change in authoritarian direction of autocracy that concern the dimension of democracy and rule of law. So to measure, then there is a methodological issue here. So you mentioned VDEM. So I use VDEM for example, for this paper. So I use VDEM. They have an electoral democracy index and liberal democracy index. Basically, with the electoral democracy index, they measure the Robert Dahl dimension of democracy. So free and fair election, elected officials, suffrage, freedom of association, freedom of expression. I also add the liberal dimension, so in terms of judicial independence, checks and balances from the legislative power, rule of law, and protection of civil liberties. And this is my question, my answer. The point is that there is a conceptual problem. The more you add attribute, the less precise you are in defining your object. There is also methodological issues, especially if you do quantitative research. and you use this kind of data, Freedom House, VDEM, they detect sometimes very low, small changes in this index. But the point is this a real thing happening? Or is this just random fluctuation due to measurement issues? So you also need to take into account. That's why I guess we need to be a little bit more conservative and maybe lose something, but being more protected toward this kind of error by having more narrow definition. There's also a theoretical problem, I will say. There's also a theoretical problem when you try to define autocratization or you use similar concept, because there's not only the data you use, it's also the definition you provide. Are we sure we are talking about the same thing? For example, when Foa and Munk wrote the article on Journal of Democracy, they were talking about democratic deconsolidation. And they say democratic deconsolidation is the fact that citizens show, for example, they are interested, they support anti-democratic values and parties, anti-system parties. They have less support for democratic values. And the question is, are we measuring, or are we talking about a change in the political regimes, or are we talking about a change in a subsystem of a political regime, such as political party system? And does a change in political party system equals to a change of political regimes? Sometimes it is the case, sometimes it is not. So that's why I guess, given the definition, it's a very good point,
I had 4 questions. I will try to answer all of them. So the first one was, John, you asked this about the semantic rebranding. Why do they need it? So why did they start it? I think the easy answer to that is that they saw, and this has been going on for a long time, right? In the 60s and maybe 50s and 60s, they realized, okay, if we start with blatantly racist language, we will never get a bigger public support. So we need to find ways in which we can frame our blatantly racist ideas and cover them in language that seems, at least to the public eye at first glance, is not racist, but so racism becomes ethno-nationalism. So I think that's why they thought they needed that. And why does it stick? I think that's the key question. That has indeed to do, because we let it stick, we being the general public, right? So, but then here I'm with Larry Diamond, that elites play a huge role in this. And elites, I don't mean like a morally corrupt, evil elite that the far right talks about, but I mean people in power, media, as well as mainstream politicians, which have the power to say, or to demarcate and say, this is not normal. And they have also, because of that, a responsibility. And I think that they have failed to use that power and responsibility, and too often go shake hands with people like Orban. Then also great question, but can we trust them? And the simple answer to that is no. So if you can think of a far-right party that is not illiberal, or maybe that does embrace rule of law, I would love to see it. Maybe that goes for people in the audience. I think they brand themselves as the true Democrats. But it's about the definition of democracy that they have that I think is tricky. And even though they will say, okay, we will uphold some elements of rule of law, such as maybe the courts, they may not be interested in the courts right away. They have deeply illiberal ideas about, oftentimes the easy one is minority rights. So maybe the courts will function if you are of a certain ethnicity or race, but not if you're from an immigrant population. You have a
two-finger. So then maybe would the categorization be like far-right parties that already have enough power to become authoritarian, and ones that don't have that yet? You know what I mean? Maybe that's the distinction. If you're saying we can't It's basically just whether they're able to autocratize fully yet or not.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't really want to find out. I don't really want to just see what happens, because we don't know where it ends, but it might start somewhere. But yeah, we don't know where. Well, I think we have a good idea of where it could end, and I don't want to go there. So yeah. Yes. Petra, your question was about money flows. And yeah, so these TikTok channels, that's a huge issue, right? Which I think platform regulation is crucial, especially because we see for younger generations, it has such an impact. And we have shockingly little knowledge about money flows in there. So there are some people working on that. And even my center, my institute, the great thing is we're interdisciplinary. So there are 3 different shareholders, and apart from me, there's also a colleague looking at media. She's a communication scientist, and she looks at this, and we're thinking about looking into money flows in particular, because we really, really don't know much about that. And I think we also there need investigative journalism. They often have much more information and also means to gather information than we as scholars have. So I think that we need to also work together with investigative journalism there. And then last but not least, Juliet, your question was also a great one, whether only the far right is using the strategic normalization. And of course, no. I would say it's one of many tools, and you already gave the answer. But I think here the question is, for what ends are they using it? And there, I will make a bridge to the trap of neutrality, would be to say, well, they're both sides of the same evil, or different sides of the same evil. And there I think, no, there we need to very clearly take normative stances on where the dangerous tendencies come from or are going. And I would also say the strategic, very aggressive normalization is also just one of many strategies. So there are many others. So one that I'm looking at is the way in which far-right ideas pop up in places and spaces that are not political, like food. Food is a great way to communicate far-right ideas about tradition, about culture, about belonging. Everyone eats, so it's a great way to signal who belongs and who doesn't. And that is not a very aggressive way. It's a different way of normalization. So I think we need to, I showed one, but there are many different strategies. It's not a very reassuring answer, but maybe you have a more reassuring answer.
So what would be a far-right meal? Food? Like...
A great question. So Geert Wilders, he will say, I don't like couscous. And of course, when he says that, you know what he means. He wants a oer-Hollandse gehaktbal. And that is meatballs. Why am I talking about dinner just before dinner? Everyone will be hungry. But I can talk for ages about this.
Okay. So thank you. The first question, or the first 2 questions, were somehow who should say who are the real Democrats somehow. So the first thing is, of course, if you compare different countries, like in the European Union, of course, first they are on a line. I think there is no perfect democracy, but still there are differences. So who should draw these lines? I think first scholars, of course, guys like Luca or some other people can do that. Political organs, of course, that is central, and that could be the most important. But I think courts of justice, they can do that too. Of course, the politics are never far away. I was thinking about the Strasbourg court and the way it does with Turkey. With Turkey, what should the court do? Should the court treat Turkey like as it were some kind of liberal democracy and turn a blind eye to all the legal authoritarian tactics? Or should it call it for what it is, but with the risk of losing any kind of relationship with the Turkish government? You have a lot of people who say it's better to turn the blind eye to get some small results than to say the truth and lose any contact with the government. I don't know, but my point is also that inside a country, there are differences two. I mean, for me, the trap of neutrality is to say I cannot do the difference, for instance, between, as I said, between journalism and between far-right manipulation like we have on French TV, CNews. So in France, you have some right-wing, far right-wing, how can we say, TV channel. And what do? They accuse the French public broadcasting, the France Télévisions, to be leftist, and so they say you do the same. We are the right, you are the left, but that's simply not true. I mean, and there are people who are looking at it objectively, measuring it, looking at the pluralism of opinion on the TV, the honesty of information, and you can see objectively, I would say, that in one case you have an opinion channel that is distorting the facts, and on the other you have real journalism with some kind of mistakes sometimes, of course, but which is really a difference of nature between the two. And for me, the trap of neutrality is to say, yeah, I cannot do the difference. Who am I to judge? And I think, yes, it's some part of the normalization strategy to say, okay, these are ideas like other, for instance, the incitement against foreigners, etc. And on a legal point of view, in most European states, I mean, we have laws against hate speech. These laws are enforced. I mean, there are a lot of condemnation for such speech, but we can see some hesitation sometimes, some judges that say, once again, we don't want to prevent the free debate of ideas, etc. And that's somehow a strategy to hinder, to prevent the application of those laws, and that's a success of the normalization strategy. Yes. And yes, I was quoting Jacob approvingly, of course. Don't tell him otherwise. Okay.
Thank you for these presentations. My name is Alihan Mesci. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Colloque. And I worked on Turkey and the culture wars in Turkey, how they emerged as rhetoric and a political tool in Erdogan's era. So I have two questions. One to Luca. I didn't understand why 2019 is a key point, and why what these data show us about 2019. What happened in 2019? So it's not clear to me in your presentation the effect of 2019 in the shift of the global change of trend in democratic backsliding. Maybe it's COVID afterwards, or Biden's election in states. So yeah, and my other question is to Léonie. It's not clear for me that I think the normalization, institutionalization, and the transnational coordination, in my sense, are not three stages. Are you like treating them as three stages? I think that, for example, transnational coordination may precede normalization and the institutionalization. So how do you treat these three dimensions? Because I think they are intervened, yeah. And in different national cases may show different configurations. So thank you very much for your work.
There's another question, I guess. Yeah. I guess we take another round.
Raphaël Demers-Morisset, thank you for your presentations. I have two questions again as well, one for Luca and one for Léonie. So first for Luca, I mean, and drawing kind of on the presentation of Léonie, I was wondering if you, in your data or in your research, if you were taking into account the role played by illiberal networks, in the illiberal international networks such as the CPAC, the NatCon, and the role they play in this autocratization plateau. Like, does it mean that they are unable to participate to the diffusion of illiberalism in like new democracy, or maybe that their strategy is actually counterproductive, but on the contrary, but they are on the other hand able to implement those autocratization. I mean, yeah, they are able to fuel autocratization in already like kind of hybrid regime. And for Léonie, I was wondering if you have other, I mean, you were mentioning remigration, and I think it's really an important part of the, like, I mean, the illiberal imaginary today and the far-right imaginary. I was wondering if you have other concepts, and for example, if you have data, or if you were considering concepts such as like coup d'etat, for example, or I think of all the Schmittian kind of literature from the US of like neo-reactionary or illiberal scholars such as Adrien Vermeulen or Curtis Yarvin, the fact that they explicitly advocate authoritarianism, and this meta-politic strategy could work with those like explicit authoritarian discourses. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot for the question. Very interesting, and I got a very quick answer to you. Why 2019? The answer is I don't know. But you know, you assume that there is something going on in 2019 that produces a global effect. It might be the case, you know, suspect might be COVID, you know, okay, 2020, but I don't have any elements to say that, you know, COVID has had the global effect on political regime dynamics. You know, I didn't do this kind of research. So once again, you assume there is something happening, or it might not be the case, you know. In the last 5-6 years, there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, this metaphor of a wave of autocratization. Wave has peaks, and then, you know, they conclude. I mean, it's a natural phenomenon. At one moment, there is an inflection point. It might be that we actually reached the inflation point in 2019, 2020. There's no need. I mean, I'm open about that. There might be a very specific effect, but I don't think so. For the other question, illiberal networks. Do I look to illiberal networks? So the quick answer is no. The long answer is looking at the illiberal networks makes sense, because this is one of the causes or correlates, you know, one of the reasons why we observe then empirical phenomena like backsliding or autocratization. And I've done this in the past in other research, not in this one, because I'm not looking at the causes of the phenomenon actually. But it makes a lot of sense. We have a project actually on that, because, you know, once again, it's a methodological choice. We might look at the political regime as a unit of analysis and say, yeah, what is happening in these specific countries, regime dynamics, autocratization, democratization, whatever. Or we might look at kind of formal and informal network fueling authoritarian values through the connection between public institutions, political parties, private companies, etc., etc. You know, there's a lot of examples. I mean, even in the US case right now, you have, you know, a kind of situation where there's private, public actors involved, transnational actors involved. So yeah, the answer is absolutely. You know, illiberal networks matter, but this is another research.
Yeah, also thanks from my side. These are both really great questions. The first one, I can clearly say no, and so I was not trying to make a progressive argument. And your question allows me to also delve into that a little bit. So I hope I made an argument that these are intertwined processes. And the way in which I presented them made sense in my head, in that I thought, okay, I first need to conceptualize what normalization is, and then I want to use the remigration example to showcase and then make this bigger argument about transnational. So there are different ingredients in a bigger picture. Now that I've been thinking about it, I could have twisted them around. I think the point where I got to was that the transnational arena often functions as the cradle of ideas that is then infused into these networks and policy debates. So I think it would, I will think about this, but I think it could make sense to flip it. But I by no means meant to make an argument that is progressive. So that in the sense that it moves in stages. And then the second question I think is also really great. So remigration is one that is sort of so in your face, right? That is so clear, and where they're also, I mean, they have a remigration summit where they celebrate this, and then there are tweets where they show this is what we're wanting to do. I can't think of any other term that is just as blatant, and I would be curious if others can think of some. Ones that I had in mind that come a bit close are maybe the Judeo-Christian civilization, right? This is also something that they often reference, by which they really just mean white European. So it is it's a word to signal something, something else. The alt-right, it's also one that I don't like, where it's a label the far right gave themselves to say we are the alternative right. We are not the sort of Nazi skinheads that you are used to from the streets. We are wearing suits and ties. So these are maybe similar ones, but I think it's good to think about similar terms, and I can't think of any. But yeah, would be curious if there are, and maybe if I might abuse my microphone to ask Luca a question, because one thing that I thought when you started, I thought, ooh, where is he going with this? Is he going to say we should all relax, right? And autocratization? No. Obviously, I know that. I know that you're not going there. But what I really liked, where you came with your argument, why I think it's important, and maybe you can talk a bit about the implications of your argument, is that this concept of democratic resilience, resilient democracies, that we should stop with that, right? Because it's a bit like with climate mitigation. It's like, we should kind of adapt to the circumstances. But if the circumstances are such that adaptation means sort of abiding by, or sort of, accepting into this autocratic world that we're increasingly moving into. So I'm just curious if you could say something about this concept of democratic resilience, whether we might need maybe militant democracy. There's a better way.
Okay. Thanks for the question. Great question. I guess, democratic resilience, there's also a huge debate about how to define, what exactly does it mean. I guess there are two dimensions of democratic resilience involved. One is more structural and long-term dimension of democratic resilience. You cannot build democratic values or democratic experience or, institutional stability in 2 years. That's something that you built, over decades of experience. And this is a long-term dimension. Another dimension is democratic resistance. So the one is more institutional, formal and informal institution. The other is more agency related. And the point is that at the end of the day, it's true that there are democracies that are more vulnerable than others, okay? Denmark is less vulnerable to democratic backsliding, autocratization compared to North Macedonia for a lot of, reasons. But it's also true that no democracy is immune. no democracy is immune to a guy that win the election and then start doing stuff like Donald Trump. And so if this is true, we also need democratic resistance tools. And that's the point. That's why it's better to be prepared.
It's like we now use democratic resilience like a fire extinguisher, right? It's like, ooh, we fly in democratic resilience to kind of, but I think that makes a lot of sense to think about it more as a long-term strategy. Yeah.
So there's long-term and short-term strategy for the same problem in a way.
So thank you very much. I think that it's time to close our works, and we'll see you tomorrow. And thank you very much at 9 o'clock.